Okay, so this video is called The Enlightenment and the American Revolution. We've talked about or introduced the idea of the Enlightenment. We've discussed it and how people agree that humans deserve this certain amount of freedom and the government should protect it. So let's do a little bit more recapping on that. Remember, France at this time, which is the 1700s, is a world power, and also England is a world power, right? And so in America, we have this war going on called the French and Indian War. All right, it broke out in North America. It was really fought all over the world, but for the purpose of this video, it was fought in North America, right? So the war was between the French and their North American allies. So the Indians in the French and Indian War did fight with the French, right? And they were fighting the British and their Native American allies, right? So it was the French and Indians versus the British and the Indians, and that's who fought in the French and Indian War, right? So that's the two people that were fighting, and they were fighting for control of North America, right? Specifically with trade in North America. And whoever won this war, they knew they would become the world's leading power across the world, right? The English won the war, so they became the leading world power, but it cost them a lot of money, So now let's talk about how that impacted the people in the Americas, the colonists in the Americas, right? So to pay for winning the French and Indian War, the British began to tax the colonists that lived there. And that obviously upset the colonists because they had no decision in the taxation of them as people. So they would tax, stamps and tea and just all sorts of traded goods in order to make money for the war, for the money they lost in the war. And they coined this term, the colonists did, of no taxation without representation, meaning they didn't want you to tax them unless they had a say in the government. And we'll get to that in a second. The British also started to enforce rules and laws made by their government, parliamentary, all right, which upset the colonists because initially they'd agreed that they didn't have to kind of follow the British laws, and now they were sending in troops and different representatives to enforce those parliamentary laws. And once again, they had no say in the government. So no taxation without representation. So the colonists were not allowed to send over delegates and participate in government, right? So that's obviously making the colonists really mad. They don't want to pay the taxes. They didn't even want to fight the French and Indian War, right? And then they don't even feel like they should be taxed without having a say in the government. So then we kind of get the beginning of the American Revolution. You can tell that the British and the colonists are starting to butt heads, are starting to really dislike each other. And different leaders throughout the colonies began to say it was time to break away from the British king. So King George was no longer working to support the colonies. So the leaders would quote people like John Locke, an Enlightenment thinker, and encourage other colonists and convince them that, hey, you're given these natural rights and the king is taking them away from you, right? And the British were not giving you those rights, and therefore you had to revolt as a colonist in America. But not everybody in the Americas agreed with that. Really about only 1/3 felt like they should break away from England. Another third said, no, we want to stay with the king, and another third just didn't care. So how do we get everybody to agree to revolt? So not everybody in the colonies agreed, but Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. And this thing was printed all over the place. People were reading it in church, on the street corners, in schools. They were reading out loud because everybody needed to hear this. And it was full of Enlightenment ideals that convinced many colonists they deserved those natural rights, and therefore the king of Britain was taking them from them, and they had to revolt. So it really was this Enlightenment work of Thomas Paine that convinced a lot of the Americans that they needed to go against the British crown. So now we have the Declaration of Independence and war, right? So in June 1776, colonists from the American colonies tasked Thomas Jefferson. They all met and they said, Thomas Jefferson, we want you to write the Declaration of Independence. He was the youngest person there, only 33 years old, and it was finally approved by all of those representatives on July 4th, 1776. So now they had a declaration, a proclamation to say, we are free of the king. We no longer want anything to do with the British king. And it included many Enlightenment ideals, specifically the rights of people, right? The right of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is directly mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, and those are Enlightenment ideals. They were empowered by the people that we studied in the previous unit. Right? The colonists agreed King George had violated their rights long enough, and now it was time to declare their freedom, which they did on July 4th, 1776. And now, just because you declare doesn't mean you get your freedom. Now they have to go out and win the American Revolution, which you'll learn about in 8th grade.